spitting hard facts on God, no cap, for real?
Yeah, buddy. Lightweight, baby!
What's up, guys? I'm Josh and I Lift Things, and I'm here to talk about the mind-muscle connection, how to get more out of less. If you've spent any amount of time in the fitness space, whether that be watching TikToks or talking in some Discord, then I'm sure you've heard about the mind-muscle connection and its supposed benefits. The goal of this video is to see if mind-muscle connection, or MMC as I'll be referring to it throughout the rest of this video, is as useful as it sounds. I mean, it makes intuitive sense, right? The muscle will only ever activate once it receives a signal from your brain. So maybe if we have better control over that signal and what we send out, we can maybe increase the muscle activation that we eventually get. Is this pseudoscience? Is this spitting hard facts on God, no cap, for real? Let's dive into it. This study here, importance of mind-muscle connection during progressive resistance training. From the results, in both muscles, focusing on using the respective muscles increase muscle activity at relative loads between 20 and 60%, but not at 80% of 1 rep max. Overall, a threshold between 60 and 80% rather than a linear decrease in selective activation with increasing intensity appeared to exist. The increased activity did not occur at the expense of decreased activity of the other muscle. Example, when focusing on activating the triceps muscle, the activity of the pec major did not decrease. On the contrary, focusing on using the triceps muscle also increased pec EMG at 50 and 60% of 1 rep max. This is very interesting. So maybe when you're using a lighter load, you could get more muscle activation out of it by focusing on it. But once intensities get so high, a muscle's gonna have to fire in order to move that weight anyways. So here's just a paper or a column, Attentional Focus for Maximizing Muscle Development, the Mind-Muscle Connection by Schoenfeld. Here they bring up a good point to where that there are actually two types of focus that you could use, internal and external. So with an internal focus, the individual thinks about bodily movements during performance. This would be akin to say during a bicep curl, you really try to think about squeezing your bicep only. You're not shifting the weight up with the rest of your body, you're not putting your shoulder into too much flexion, although that can maybe be beneficial. You are purely concentrating on feeling the bicep work. Alternatively, an external focus directs the exercise's attention to the environment. For example, in the squat, an internal focus could be to squeeze your glutes as you ascend, whereas an external focus could be to drive the floor away from your body. This is very akin in using cues. For instance, a big cue that is very useful for people, especially if they have some knee valgus, which means during a squat their knees are coming closer together, is you could ask them to imagine a giant crack between their feet going all the way through the earth, and their goal should be to push the earth apart. That seems to really help people. So not only can cues be used for proper form, they can also be used for more increased muscle activation. Another type of cue that kind of bleeds the line between internal and external would be actually feeling the muscle working. Say you're doing a unilateral row. Well, you could actually put your hand on the lat. This is known as palpation, and then you can actually feel the muscle contract in your hand that's touching that muscle. Here, Schoenfeld goes over more research. In a recent review of literature encompassing over 50 published studies on this topic, Wolf found that more than 90% of these studies showed superior improvements in motor learning when subjects used an external compared with internal focus. Beneficial effects were seen across a wide variety of activities and outcome measures, lending strong support for the use of an external focus when the goal is to boost performance. Now, in regards to hypertrophy, specifically for resistance training, they even talk about how some of these external cues may result in a more efficient movement, which may add numbers to the bar, but which may actually take away muscle activation. So for us, when the goal is to maximize hypertrophy, indirect evidence suggests that an internal focus may be the best approach. A number of studies have shown greater activation of a given muscle when subjects were instructed to adopt an internal focus of attention. This has been most prominently displayed in the abdominal musculature. Carson Willett found that subjects were able to significantly alter mean electromyography EMG activity to either the rectus abdominis or obliques by consciously focusing on the respective muscles during the performance of the curl-up. Before the exercise, they were actually instructed on how to visualize either the rectus or obliques, and then they had verbal reinforcement of the instructions that were given to them during the performance. Another study here, mind-muscle connection training principle, influence of muscle strength and training experience during a pushing movement. From the conclusion here, pec activity can be increased when focusing on using this muscle during push-ups, whereas the ability to do this for the triceps is dependent on years of training experience. maximal muscle strength does not appear to be a decisive factor for the ability to selectively activate these muscles. The information about triceps here completely contradicts this first study that we brought up, which said up to about 80% of your 1 rep max, there was a much higher increase of muscle activation when just focusing on the muscle. So maybe it is an innate ability, maybe it is a learned trait, but it still seems to kind of go out the window once weights get high enough. Now we have mind-muscle connection, effects of verbal instructions on muscle activity during bench press exercise. From the results, a significant main effect of the load intensity was detected for all muscles. On the contrary, a significant main effect of verbal instructions was effective only for the LT, which, as we can see up here, is the long head of the triceps. The other muscles were not affected by the verbal instructions. In layman's terms from the discussion, the present study showed that resistance-trained males can alter the activation of the long head of the triceps, but not the pecs, during both moderate and higher intensity bench press in response to verbal instruction. From all these studies, you can activate the triceps more so than they should be, up to about 80% intensity with internal focus. You can activate the chest more during a push-up, but not the triceps. And now you can activate the long head of the triceps more and not the chest. Even though in the first study, the chest was also highly active, even more so when focusing on tricep activation. Here we have mind-muscle connection, limited effect of verbal instructions on muscle activity in a seated row exercise. From the abstract, verbal instruction increases EMG activity in the first 3 repetitions of an exercise, but its effect on an entire exercise set until failure is unknown. Once there are changes in motor unit recruitment due to fatigue, or Henneman-Size principle, the effect of verbal instructions can change during different intervals of a set. This study analyzed whether verbal instruction emphasized the contraction of back muscles, i.e. myoelectric activity, during initial, intermediate, and final exercise repetitions performed until failure. Took 20 participants, they used surface electrodes, which are kind of gross, but they put them on the lats, the teres, the biceps, and the posterior deltoid, found that with verbal instruction, there was increased EMG mean amplitude in the lats, and reduced EMG mean amplitude in the posterior delt, but only on initial repetitions. Other muscle EMG amplitudes did not change. On intermediate repetitions, there was a reduced signal amplitude only in the posterior delt. The verbal instruction did not interfere with signal amplitude on final repetitions, nor in the median frequency throughout the series. Verbal instruction seems to have little effect on increasing myoelectric activity of these targeted muscles in an entire set of resistance training. Now here we have the mind-muscle connection and resistance training, friend or foe. Now this is one of those times where the full study is very interesting. I gave you guys the title. There are ways to find this that I cannot recommend, but you can read it. But from the publicly available abstract, here you can see that these guys indicate that focusing on the pec major and triceps during bench press exercise selectively enhance their activation and thus suggest a training strategy. However, the authors did not discuss the well-established negative effects that focusing on specific muscle groups has on exercise performance. Once again, their big complaint is basically on the topic of internal versus external focus. They feel as if the authors tried to make the point that only internal focus was viable, but there is a lot of research that external focus could be even better. But once again, as Schoenfield even stated, it seems that external focus, sure, could result in greater performance, but as far as hypertrophy is concerned, internal focus is probably the king. By the way, if you guys don't know how to go find full studies yet, spend 2 seconds Googling. Here we have mind-muscle connection, verbal instructions after electromyographic activity for elbow flexors and extensors during co-contraction training. From the results here, the 2-way ANOVA showed a significant interaction between muscles and verbal instruction. Post hoc analysis indicated that verbal instructions influenced the bicep EMG activity. Also, post hoc tests showed a difference in the EMG activity between the bicep and the tricep when the verbal instruction was to emphasize the elbow extension. This is a really funny one. Mind-muscle connection revisited. Do 100 studies about beanbag tossing, stick balancing, and dart throwing have any relevance for strength training? This is why science is so fucking cool. Once again, you're gonna have to go find that full study, but they are specifically trying to challenge or talk about the statements made in the first paper we looked at, where they showed that tricep activation could be increased through a mind-muscle connection or internal focus all the way up to about 80% of your 1 rep max. They kind of pose the question if increased activation can maybe even be a good thing at times. For instance, increased activation would mean increased fatigue, which means less volume. Is that necessarily a problem? Well, this is a big thing of debate currently. Some people think that as long as you're going to failure, that it is fine. Others think that there is some threshold for actually amount of volume that still needs to be hard in order to get the metabolic fatigue that we are looking for. This is the ever-changing debate between mechanical tension versus metabolic fatigue, and which one is more important for hypertrophy, of which the jury still seems to be out. But it is at least worth considering, and this paper is a whole lot of fun. Go read it. I think it's like 3 pages long or something. It's just a letter to the original authors. Here we have a Stronger by Science article, the best website in the entire biz. Internal cues don't affect muscle activation with explosive lifting. From the key points here, with low 50% 1 rep max loads on the bench press, trained participants were able to slightly increase pec and triceps activation by focusing on the target muscle, but only when performing slow reps. When trying to lift explosively, actively focusing on using the pecs or triceps didn't affect muscle activation. Trying to press the weight explosively resulted in more muscle activation than pressing the weight slowly, regardless of cues. For a quick refresher on that idea, you should go watch my rep speed video. Now, when you hear something like that, you may think that, oh, okay, well, it's just completely useless then. How often am I training with a 50% 1 rep max? That's not really the case here. For instance, this means that for your warm-ups, you could get more increased muscle activation. This means that for your deload weeks, you could get more increased muscle activation. This means if you are in some rehab or prehab routine, you could get more muscle activation while still using lighter loads. People think of this binary all the time where this is good and this is bad and this has to be optimal, but you have to think that will only be for a certain subsect of the population. Not everyone is healthy. Not everyone's a spry 16-year-old that has no fucking anything to do in life other than go to school and then train. There are tons of real world applications to where this could be useful. You just have to think a little bit. And finally, the meta-analysis that they have been referring to in all the past citations. Superiority of external attentional focus for motor performance and learning, systematic reviews, and meta-analyses. So 73 studies, 1,800 participants, 40 studies, 1,200 participants were used for examining the effects of external focus versus internal focus on behavioral outcomes of motor performance and learning, separately for retention and transfer phases, respectively. Now, this is very important. A lot of people try to take a study that they don't understand that much, and then they try to apply it to things that it's not meant to be applied to. For instance, this is not talking about resistance training and hypertrophy. That doesn't mean that it's not interesting or it couldn't be useful for what we're trying to talk about here, but it does not mean that it's directly applicable to you in your everyday life in the gym. Overall, the meta-analytic results are consistent with prior narrative reviews and indicate that an external focus is superior to an internal focus, whether considering tests of motor performance or learning, and regardless of age, health condition, and level of skill expertise. Wrapping this all up, what does it tell us? Well, this video is coming out exactly right after my placebo in weightlifting video. The whole point of this series is kind of to talk about how much your mind can actually impact things. Again, not to be a shaman telling you if you believe you can fly, you can jump off a skyscraper. More so that we have an internal governor that seems to dictate how we are going to perform. If you are a strength athlete, it would be very, very good for you to work on external cues. Any of us that have done a crazy high 1 rep max on a lift, we weren't worried about muscle activation. You're not gearing up for a fucking like raw PR squat, and then you're like, okay, really gotta make sure my bicep femoris feels this one. That's not how that works. On the contrary, any of us that have ever trained for more hypertrophy or aesthetics or bodybuilding or whatever weird term you want to use, absolutely internal focus is king. Sure, there can be some types of external focus used, for instance, on a barbell curl. For a form cue, you may remember to try to keep your pinkies up to make sure you are in complete supination. That would increase the activation of your biceps. However, we're going to get a much bigger impact out of that with just thinking about the squeeze on our biceps. But we have to remember, when using higher loads, none of this will probably matter in the first place. Kai Green has a really, really interesting quote where he says, "I can get more out of using a 20-pound dumbbell than you can." And the point is, he's one of the biggest guys of all time and could probably curl 315 if he really fucking wanted to. But the point stands. He has that connection, that communication with his muscle. He could get increased activation and get more out of it in the end of the day than any of us could. Arnold has talked about how the biggest mistake people make in the gym is not actually feeling the muscle. Do some people probably have a natural advantage being able to do this? Sure. It's also very much a learned thing. If you are having issues feeling a certain muscle, it may behoove you to just, when you're sitting at home, just try to flex and pop that muscle. Or if you have a muscle imbalance, it could be that you have just lesser control over that muscle. For instance, my left lat is smaller than my right lat. I can pop my right lat pretty freely just thinking about it. My left lat is harder to do and it feels more awkward, and I have to shift further back rather than just popping down. That is something I'm trying to work on. My left pec is smaller than my right pec. Before my gym session on my push days, I will just be popping my left pec, trying to ingrain this contraction, trying to make that connection more thorough. Is there evidence that this will help? Maybe. Is there evidence that it will harm? Probably not. So, is mind-muscle connection worth it? Yes, absolutely. Especially if your goal is bodybuilding or aesthetics or just being a regular guy. Is mind-muscle connection worth it for a power lifter? Definitely. At least for the fact that you could probably hone in on certain muscle groups during your warm-up or ramp-up sets. Remember, your mind is the car, but you are the driver. And guys, that is the video. If you like this solid content, do me a favor, like the video if you like it, subscribe if you really like it to see the next one that comes out. I post a new video every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Make sure you leave a comment because I respond to every single one of them and it really helps out the channel, and maybe even share to a buddy. If you really like this style of content, you can follow all of these socials. They will be linked down in the description. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.